For as long as people have called this place home, they've been welcomed with clean air, clean water, and an abundance of nature. As time went on, people saw the need to balance how we build cities with how we protect farms and forests. That's why across Greater Portland, in 24 cities and 3 counties, there's one metro government that brings us all together to maintain that vital balance, to provide services across cities and counties, to create a better future together. Hello, we're Metro. We plan for housing, jobs, and safe transportation. We protect land, air, and water by managing garbage and recycling. We support arts and culture by overseeing local venues to keep the economy growing. And we connect people to nature across 17,000 acres of parks and trails, and at the Oregon Zoo. Metro is all of us working together, connecting how we live today with how we plan for the future. Hello, we're Metro, and so are you.
All right, I'd like to call the Metro Council Business Meeting for November 9th, 2023 to order. I will now ask our clerk, Connor, to call the roll for attendance.
Thank you, President Peterson. Councilor Lewis.
Present.
Councilor Gonzalez.
Present. Good morning.
Good morning. Councilor Simpson.
Present.
Councilor Wong.
Present.
Councilor Rosenthal is excused today. I believe that Councilor Nolan will be joining us shortly, and President Peterson.
Here, thank you. Before we begin our agenda items, can we please play the safety video for our in-person attendees?
I'm Carice, and I'm the dive safety officer here at the Oregon Zoo, and safety is a big part of my job. Some of the things we consider here is diver safety. I'm out here at the Oregon Zoo, and you're at the Metro Regional Center. The council chamber is located on the 3rd floor of this building. In the event of fire or fire alarm, please exit through the door in the northeast corner of the room, go down the steps to the 2nd floor, and exit through the main entrance by the reception desk and gather in the courtyard outside the entrance. In the event of a medical or fire emergency, please call 911 and notify the security agent at the front desk. The nearest defibrillator is mounted on the steps leading from the reception desk down to Grand Avenue. Thank you.
All right, I will now open public communication on non-agenda items. Connor, will you please describe to the audience our procedures for the public communication portion of the meeting?
Yes, thank you. So if anyone wishes to testify on non-agenda items, now is the time to do so. Public testimony will be limited to 3 minutes, and I'll manage a timer to go off the 3-minute mark. If you've not already signed up to speak, you can do so now. If you're joining us on Zoom, you can sign up by hitting the raise hand button, which is either at the bottom of your screen or within the reactions tab. If you're joining us in person, you can sign up by filling out one of the blue cards in the back of the room and bringing that up to me. For those joining us virtually on Zoom, I'll be promoting you to a full panelist, so I'll call your name. You'll see a window pop up asking you to accept that promotion. Once you do so, you'll rejoin and be able to turn on your camera and unmute yourself. And as a reminder to everybody testifying today, you do not need to give your physical address. However, please do identify yourself for the record before testifying. So with that, President Peterson, councilors, we've had a couple of folks sign up in advance to testify today. So we will start with Matthias Quackenbush.
Any of these microphones work?
Yep, they are all live.
They're all off?
They're all on.
On, okay.
So your time will begin when you begin speaking.
All right, Council President, members of the Council, my name is Matthias Quackenbush, resident of District 5. I'm here to register deep frustration with the course Metro is charting with its 2023 Regional Transportation Plan. Portland has seen record highs in annual fatal crashes for the last 2 years, and this year might break the record yet again. Metro's 2018 and 2023 projections showed Portland area emissions decreasing, but the database for road transportation emissions shows emissions have been climbing in the region for the last 7 years. Our efforts aren't working, our models are faulty, and we're running out of time. Someone needs to intervene. Metro could be that body, but the 2023 Regional Transportation Plan is the same status quo, car-centric infrastructure that has led us to the brink of climate devastation. The plan touts its abandonment of volume to capacity ratio as a project priority metric. However, the only criteria for priority that's applied project by project is throughway reliability, or volume capacity ratio in all but name. Vehicle miles traveled reduction and network completion are only evaluated at the total plan level, which follows Metro's modeling, not real-world data. This allows for numerous dangerous and polluting projects to pass muster and effectively creates an artificial demand for road expansion projects by stating travel times are currently inadequate. We are under no legal obligation to set such travel time goals, and their central place in the plan yields disastrous results. The material impacts of this plan reflect this imbalance in priorities. The 2023 public draft slashes transit investment by 2/3 and doubles roadway expansion spending over the 2018 RTP. Active transportation networks will not approach 75% completion for 20 years. Local job access via transit will not improve over the 20-plus year life of the plan, stuck at an abysmal 8% for over a generation. Total funding for safety improvements on Lombard, Stark, Division, Barber, and Powell is less than half of the cost for one grade separation project in Airport Way. Worst of all, the draft RTP maintains 3 freeway mega projects as constrained priorities that will lock in increased emissions for decades to come and worsen inequities throughout the region. Fundamental failures like these require fundamental change. We need material changes to this plan in every council district, and we simply don't have the time before the December 6th federal deadline. I'm calling on Metro Council, therefore, to amend this plan in 2 major ways. 1, the Rose Quarter and I-205 Phase 2 expansion projects should be deleted outright. Both are almost certain to fail to secure funding, and both will inflict irreparable damage to our state if approved. They have had numerous opportunities to pass muster and have failed. Metro needs to be decisive and say enough is enough so we can make space for projects that align with community priorities, like those in the video we just saw. 2, demand that each project, not the plan as a whole, be individually evaluated by the project sponsors based on Metro's safety, climate, and equity criteria. Metro can then prioritize projects based on the VMT reduction and network completion measures described in Chapter 4 of the plan. Travel speed reliability on throughways should be eliminated from project prioritization measures and should no longer guide Metro's decision-making. Making these 2 changes is possible under the tight timeline. Please make this a plan for the people. Don't let this opportunity escape. We may not have another. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next up we have Anna Kurnitsky. And on deck is Jackie Kerouac-Fram. So Anna, you'll have 3 minutes and your time will begin when you begin speaking. And you don't need to touch the mic.
Thank you. Hello, Council President and members of the Council. I'm Anna Kurnitsky, Executive Director of Community Warehouse. I'm here with Jackie from Rebuilding Center, and we're representing the Portland Reuse Collective, a group of reuse and equity-focused nonprofits headquartered here in Portland, also including Free Geek, Repair PDX, and Trash for Peace. We are your local reuse experts, leveraging decades of institutional knowledge in reuse repair, community engagement, cultural responsiveness, and community resilience. The Reuse Collective developed a response to the proposed scenarios in Metro's System Facilities Plan, acknowledging our collective goals to advance sustainability, equity, and social impact. Our proposal is for Metro to remodel existing transfer stations and/or build new facilities to develop reuse collection centers, contract with nonprofit organizations to collect, repair, and distribute reusable items from those centers, and set criteria for those contracts to prioritize nonprofits with positive reputations, strong operational structures, and missions that most directly benefit marginalized communities and advance equity through the contracted services provided. Also, to establish a new reuse fee distributed as contractual funding to reuse nonprofits to recover more materials for reuse and repair. These investments, as part of the larger package of improvements to Metro's facilities, would transform our regional reuse system, align with the 2030 Regional Waste Plan, and meet Metro's goals to reduce waste, increase access, and keep costs affordable. Our reuse and repair economy provides significant environmental, economic, and social benefits for our region, even while operating independently and without ongoing public resources. Community Warehouse has operated without public funding for 22 years. While this has left us significantly under-resourced, our social enterprise has helped sustain our work, but this earned revenue source has dropped from covering 35% of our costs to 20% in the past year. Even as our stores increase sales, costs are just outpacing revenue. Community Warehouse is the only furniture bank in our region providing furniture as people get housed. And as the metro area scales up to respond to our homelessness crisis, we need support to scale up too, to redistribute furnishings needed to meet this demand. If we were able to access ongoing funding to expand space, staffing, increase accessible furniture pickups, and repair programs, we could drastically increase diversion of items and meet the needs of our neighbors transitioning from homelessness to housing. This is just one example of the possible impact of Metro's partnership with reuse agencies. It's a dream that's doable. Together, we can shift our historical focus on waste to a comprehensive regional plan that invests in reuse, repair, and community resilience. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up we have Jackie Kerouac-Fram. And your time will begin when you begin speaking.
Good morning. I am Jackie Kerouac-Fram, Executive Director of the Rebuilding Center. We, too, have operated without public support for more than 25 years, keeping more than 3 million pounds of material out of the landfill and putting it back into the hands of our community. We, too, used to be able to support our work with social enterprise. Our earned revenue in 2013 covered 98% of our expenses, but that percentage has fallen to 63% this year and continues to decline as wages and other costs steadily increase. We cannot raise prices. In fact, our low prices are more important now than ever as housing and building materials prices soar. We support affordable home maintenance and retention through the amazing resource of reclaimed materials, and we need public support to keep going. As a case in point, we have been granted free warehouse space by various public institutions over the years to support our ability to process large donated materials. As of right now, we are losing that free warehouse space at the end of this year. Real estate prices and development potential have made every property too valuable to gift use to us, and I have not been able to secure an alternative for less than $10,000 per month. We can't afford that. And this is just one example of why we and other reuse organizations need public support to maintain our work, not only as key materials management partners, but as organizations that provide real social benefits to the people of our community: furniture, affordable home repair, digital access, and workforce training, to name a few. No one else is filling this gap, and it shouldn't be up to private philanthropy to make sure we are able to continue our work as Metro's reuse partners. The Portland Reuse Collaborative invites Metro to step up with us at this critical inflection point for all of our organizations, to provide contractual funding based on deliverables such as tonnage diverted from the landfill, or to support increased accessibility for people without personal transportation. Currently, we subsidize 84% of the cost of material pickups because transportation is one of the biggest barriers to access. This transportation barrier is not addressed in any of the current system facilities plan scenarios, since having more drop-off locations does not serve people who lack personal transportation. Creating a reuse fee could allow Metro to contract with reuse organizations to provide streamlined, subsidized, coordinated pickups of reusable items, a straightforward way to provide equitable access to reuse. Council President and members of the Council, we are eager to partner with Metro to fulfill 2030 reuse goals. We know reuse, we are culturally responsive, and we get it done. With your support, we will move our region even further toward equitable material practices that build and support resilient communities. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, President Peterson, councilors, that is everybody who has signed up in advance to testify today. I'll just give folks in our Zoom or physical audience another chance to sign up. Once again, you can do so by hitting the raise hand button on Zoom or by bringing up a blue card from the back of the room to me. And seeing no further hands, President Peterson.
Thank you. I will close public communication on non-agenda items and move on to our first presentation. I have the honor today to introduce Portland City Commissioner Dan Ryan to have a conversation with us and a presentation on the City of Portland Safe Rest Village update. Commissioner, come forward. Thank you and any staff you want.
Check over there.
This
is fine.
You're
Okay.
good wherever you want to sit.
I'm giving you all room. Should everyone just come up so we don't?
Commissioner, I just want to say thank you for being such a good friend of Metro and a good partner, and all of the good work. I'm very happy to see you here today and get an update.
Thank you so much, President Peterson, and good morning. Good morning to all the distinguished members of the Metro Council. It's great to be here. You have really nice digs, I got to say. It's really refreshing. My name is Dan Ryan. I'm the City Commissioner for the City of Portland. And when I was elected in September of 2020, the mayor gave me the assignment, the dotted line assignment to the county's Office of Homeless Services. And in those conversations, I was always a little puzzled why we weren't having more conversations about the humanitarian crisis on our streets in terms of what can we do in the interim to give people some services and some temporary and transitional type shelter housing. And I'm a big believer, of course, in having someone in an apartment, but my own lived experience taught me with my brother, who had multiple diagnoses in the behavioral health and mental health and even physical medical categories, that moving someone from the streets who've been chronically homeless into an apartment, even with services somewhere in the building, it's quite an isolated move. And we would experience that when they would stay with one of my other brothers, and they were fine. Tim was fine if we were home with him and connecting with them. But once we were out of the house, boom, they would go out and use. Addiction's a strong pull, and you're gonna go find your source. And so just having that lived experience, I became more and more puzzled. So when the money came available through ARPA, we decided, the city council with a 5-0 vote in July 2 years ago, that we'd go for it and just build these villages. And the good news is, 2 years later, we promised 6, 7 are now operating, and we're seeing some really good early results. I want to really thank the team for diving into data. One of my biggest challenges also, and where I was puzzled the most, was our lack of real-time data. And so I wanted to make sure that the villages started establishing those sets. And so we're seeing some early good signs. This is the first year of reports, so it's partial. We're seeing they're all full now, and there'll be many more people being served this next year. It's averaging about 3 to 9 months in terms of giving the providers a chance to really assess how they're doing, getting them hooked into services, building that trust. We hear a lot about service resistance. It's a thing. And I think the transition housing, allowing them to bring their dog in, having their freedom to feel safe. And I'll just end with a story about several women that I would talk to when we were building these, and they were saying, please get them up and running. I have not felt safe, of course, on the streets, but I felt even less unsafe in an apartment where you'd have to go down the hallway to the bathroom, and there would be people that harm them on the streets now living next to them. And so they didn't feel safe in some of the apartment units that they were being placed into. So this seems to be especially good for people that just merely want that freedom to feel safe, to build their resilience, and then get into housing with services. So it's that transition that I think we were missing in the system. I will go ahead and turn this over to Brandy Westerman. Brandy, you just started a month and a half ago, 2 months ago. It feels longer. You know how that is. And the good news about Brandy, as our emergency humanitarian leader for the city, she comes from Mercy Corps, and I really can't think of a better life experience, professional experience to do this international work in the humanitarian crisis, and for us to be honest about what we're facing today. And I know it's not all about the addictions and all about mental health, but the truth is we're dealing with something that we've never seen before. The poisonous drugs are unlike any drugs before. I sometimes will say that I reminisce that my brother was a heroin addict, and that was a different beast, but they were calmer, and the withdrawal symptoms were actually easier than what we're seeing from fentanyl and the new meth. So as a state, as a region, we just have to face the truth that we're dealing with something that's so grim and challenging. And I want to thank the system that we're building here in the transition housing, that they're welcoming those people that are willing to say yes to services. And one of my favorite signs that I see on the sites of the villages is the 12-step meetings that we're offering. So we're giving people hope and connection. Again, it's from isolation to connection. Take it over, Brandy.
Hey, thank you, Commissioner. Good morning, President Peterson, councilors. For the record, my name is Brandy Westerman. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Emergency Humanitarian Operations Director for the City of Portland, as you heard, newly in this role for about 6 weeks now. Please go ahead and start the PowerPoint. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here today to share the Safe Rest Village annual report with you, which you all have a printed copy of, and which we've posted online. Thank you. I'll share data about our program, including who we've served in the last year, an overview of program finances and the outcomes. At the end of my presentation, I'll hand it over to Andy Goebel, Director of All Good Northwest, one of our service providers. We will finish with a short video featuring shelter participants and staff, and have time for a few questions. This slide shows the current map of our Safe Rest villages and their geographic distribution across the city of Portland. Safe Rest Villages are temporary outdoor shelters ranging in size from 28 to 60 sleeping units, providing safe and secure place for people to rest. All Safe Rest Villages provide basic amenities, including meals, hygiene, and laundry facilities, as well as the supportive services needed for someone to transition from the streets to housing, including case management, peer support, housing and employment, navigation, and much more. We currently have 7 sites, including the city's first RV safe park, providing 326 sleeping units in total. Some of these units serve couples, which allows the Safe Rest Village system to serve up to 400 people on any given night. Next slide, please. During the past fiscal year, from July 1st, 2022 through June 30th, 2023, we had 5 Safe Rest Villages that were open. Some were open the full year, while some were open for just a few months of that year. During that time, we provided 43,475 nights of safe sleep in 211 sleeping units. We served 345 people and had 143 exits from shelter. Of those exits, 70 people moved into housing. The mean length of stay for people who exited a Safe Rest Village was 158 days, just under 6 months. We know that not having legal documents is one of the biggest barriers to accessing housing, employment, and reliable healthcare services. Documents needed included state IDs, birth certificates, and Social Security cards. These documents can be difficult to obtain without an address to mail them to or the resources to pay for them. We're happy to report that our shelter providers supported participants with obtaining 169 of these critical documents last year, removing barriers for shelter participants to access things like housing and employment. Next slide, please. We also know that various populations are disproportionately impacted by houselessness, including Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, as well as LGBTQIA+ folks, and people living with a disability. Digging deeper into the demographics of the people served at the Safe Rest Villages last fiscal year, we find that 33% of participants identified as chronically homeless. HUD's definition of chronically homeless is extensive, but in the simplest terms, it means a person living with a disability in a place not meant for human habitation for the last 12 months or for 12 months total over the last 3 years. Some of our shelter participants report living on the street for 10, 15, or even 20 years before entering a Safe Rest Village. 58% of the participants identified as male, 28% identify as female, 8% identified as a gender other than male or female, and 6% identified as transgender. "57% of the Safe Rest Village shelter participants identified as having one or more disabilities. And 57% of participants identified as non-white or multiracial. As a reference point, the most recent census identified about 26% non-white or multiracial people in Portland, and about 22% in Multnomah County. In the 2022 point-in-time count, about 38% of unsheltered people in Multnomah County identified as non-white or multiracial. While we do see racial disparities in who is living unsheltered, we are meeting our goal of serving people of color in the Safe Rest Villages at or higher than the rate they experience unsheltered houselessness in our region. Next slide, please. The Safe Rest Village program was originally conceived as a 3-year pilot program and is primarily funded, as the Commissioner stated, through American Rescue Plan dollars, also known as ARPA. The Safe Rest Village program represents the city's largest ARPA investment, with an allocation of $52.3 million. These ARPA funds run through December 2024. The program was also allocated $3 million in general city funds and $1 million in a state grant, bringing the total funding for the Safe Rest Village program over 3 years to $56.3 million. Next slide, please. Shifting to expenses. The Safe Rest Village program spent $19.9 million in fiscal year 22-23. This slide shows how expenses they're spread across each site. This includes all acquisition and construction costs, shelter operations, including shelter staffing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, as well as service and meals for shelter participants, and regular site maintenance and ongoing expenses like utilities. Expenses at each site vary for a couple of reasons. Some of these sites were built in the previous fiscal year, so the numbers only represent the ongoing shelter operations. That's the case for the BIPOC, Queer Affinity Village, and the Multnomah Safe Rest Village. The 4 other sites were under construction and were only open for part of the year. Next slide, please. One question we often get asked is, how much does it cost to run a Safe Rest Village for 1 year? This slide is a snapshot of shelter operations for a 12-month period at each site. This does not include any of the one-time costs of acquisition or construction, but it does include the cost of our shelter provider contracts and ongoing utilities and site maintenance. In general, expenses range from $2.1 million for a 28-unit shelter like Multnomah Safe Rest Village to $3 million for a 60-unit shelter like Peninsula Crossing Safe Rest Village. The cost of shelter operations for all 7 Safe Rest Villages for 1 year is about $19.6 million. With 326 shelter units, the cost per unit per year would be about $60,000. However, as some of these units can serve couples, full capacity of 400 people on any given night would bring this down to $49,000 per space per year. When we take shelter exits into consideration, the price per person per year can be even less. Our goal is that people transition out of the Safe Rest Villages in 3 to 9 months. This is the end of the PowerPoint presentation. I'd now like to hand things over to Andy Goebel. He is the director of All Good Northwest and one of the city's main service providers. Andy.
Thanks, appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and to speak with you. For the record, my name is Andy Goebel, and I use he, him pronouns, and I serve as the executive director of All Good Northwest. Our organization provides services, support services, and sheltering at 5 sites, 3 of which are Safe Rest Villages. We operate BIPOC Village, Queer Affinity Village, and the Multnomah Safe Rest Village. We've been doing so for the last 2 years, a little over 2 years. At every one of our villages, each participant is wrapped around by a team of individuals who provide services. And that includes a case manager, a behavioral health specialist, a housing navigation specialist, a peer support specialist, in addition to the leadership on site, team lead supervisors, and program managers. And what we find is that having a team of individuals work with each participant increases participation from participants. As Commissioner Ryan mentioned, system resistance is real. And too often in agencies like ours, we have case managers who have caseloads of up to 30 or 50. And our case managers have caseloads of between 8 and 10 individuals, and we find that allows them to build that kind of support to wrap around with that team of individuals, all moving toward successful housing placement, which is our goal. Independence and self-efficacy, which is most often in the form of permanent housing. I'm proud to say that last month alone, our organization housed 44 individuals out of all 5 of our shelter projects, 3 of which are the Safe Rest Villages. Now, we believe strongly in the housing first model. However, too often, housing first becomes housing only. People are put behind a door with their keys with no support services. And the result becomes the recidivism that we see where people cycle into housing and out of housing, as Commissioner Ryan referred to. Somewhere along the way, participants need to build resiliency, either in shelter or after they're housed, or as we do, both. Our social service team has devised a theory of change that involves 6 key resiliencies that we work with every one of our participants on. And those are stress tolerance, connection, health, meaning, efficacy, and belonging. If we can begin to instill and strengthen these resiliencies in all of our program participants, we strongly believe and have seen that the chances that they will be in housing and stay in housing are significantly increased, which is why we have such a robust staffing model at all of our sites. Successful housing placements should be defined by individuals retaining their housing. The SRV program, these villages, give us the opportunity. They're an important part of increasing successful placements defined in this manner. I'm grateful to Commissioner Ryan and to the Safe Rest Village team for affording us the opportunity to serve in the way we do at these Safe Rest Villages, and we look forward to continuing to do so successfully for years to come. Thanks.
Thank you. So we'd like to share with you a short video so that you can hear from participants and staff in their own words. Connor, do you have the video?
Yes, I will bring that up now. Okay, and it should pop up on our screens here in just a moment.
It's a different world out there. You know, the homeless world is cold. I'm privy to how that lifestyle is, how alone it is. People die. This is a serious crisis that we're having.
My name is Sonia Lee Sebastian. People don't realize how much multitasking that has to really be done. You're trying to provide a roof over your head and where you're going to eat, where you're going to pee, and if your stuff's going to be stolen, and how you hide, you have to go hide your things, and if you have to, you know, I just don't sleep. The few times I slept, I got everything stolen. So then you have nothing, then you really have nothing.
Our Safe Rest Village aims to provide emotional and physical safety. That's important. A lot of them don't have organ IDs. A lot of them don't know where the welfare office is. A lot of them don't know what a food stamp card looks like.
Yeah, the main goal is to bring people in and get them stable from mental health issues, drug and alcohol addiction, behavioral issues, and we help people with budgeting. It's all about getting people ready to be from the streets to be housed. It's one of the reasons why a lot of people don't go to the shelters in different places, because they can't have their pets.
This is Jesse Sebastian. He is my federally registered service dog. For me, I'm not going anywhere. My dog's not going.
I wish people could see the expressions on people's faces when they get offered a place here. I wish they could see the emotions and tears of being in a place that they feel loved right when they come in here. They have a restroom. They can bathe every day. They have a safe place to sleep that's comfortable. They got air conditioning. They got heaters in their space.
You could do your laundry when you want to. Laundry is personal. A lot of people sometimes don't have a lot. They have the clothes that they wear over and over again. So when we had a washer dryer here, we were like, wow.
I like this whole idea of this because it's a step between homelessness and housing. So a lot of people think it's just put them into a place and get them a job and they'll be fine. And it's like, no, it's not that simple.
Why this is effective is it's just enough shelter and then it's outside. So you're figuring that homeless people are out on the street for years. You can't put them in a high rise. That's too much of a adjustment. Like, this is perfect.
We put them first with everything we do. It makes me feel a part of something positive. That's cool.
It's amazing to see since I've been here a month, the transformations and their personality, everybody's coming together. It is a sense of community. I felt relieved when I first woke up here. Yeah, relieved and safe.
Thank you so much, Brandy, and thank you so much, Andy. It's good to have you both here. I wanted to end with just a couple things. One is, I think that number that you saw, the 169 documents that were retrieved, I wanted to just settle in. These are people that were so off the grid that we didn't have any registrations of them in terms of being alive and well and being hooked into our services. So that's such an important part of this work. And I also want to acknowledge how many engagement sessions we did. And I'm thinking of you, Jake, down there. I did 50. I still have a little bit of PTSD from those Zoom sessions with like 300 people in that damn chat, the chat function that would say lovely things as we were trying to do this work. So the headwinds were pretty extreme. They were everywhere. And they were also extreme internally. In fact, those were more troublesome, in my opinion. And I think going back 2 years ago, the political will wasn't there to invest in this type of innovation. I think that's changed internally, and I know it's changed externally. The people who are paying and investing in this tax so that we can get to the bottom line of this crisis are wildly supportive. So I'm also here to say that we'll be having to make some tough decisions collectively, the city, the county, Metro, on how we invest in this after the ARPA dollars go away. And I just wanted you to have a chance to chew on this. Anytime you want to go out on a site visit, that would be wonderful. We'll continue to have challenges. This is humbling work. It's messy. It's also something that we have to keep leaning into and keep learning from. That's why we love data. From the data, we will continue to learn and move forward. So it's an honor to be here today. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to partnering with you as we move forward. Any questions for the team?
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, everyone, for being here today. I would agree that there is more openness to innovation now, and I think you see that as part of the county implementation plans and the supportive housing service measure. I will open up for questions for counselors. Councilor Nolan.
Thanks, Madam President. Thank you for sharing the data and also the compassion that's clear in your services. I'm interested in some more data. Particularly, you mentioned the team that you provide for each resident. I didn't hear you mention a case manager from Disability Services with Multnomah County, and I'm wondering if that's included. And that extends to a question of, among the 169 documents, does that include registration with the OHP? Does it include registration for SSI? There was an allusion to SNAP. Those are wraparound services that also ought to be part of this process.
Yes, and to be clear, they are. Our case managers do partner with aging and disability quite frequently because, to be honest, there are times when individuals arrive in our villages and the level of care that they need, we just can't do. We're not equipped to do that. So we have regular partnership and communication with aging and disabilities. And then the initial task for our case managers is to mitigate the barriers that include signing them up for SNAP, for OHP, making sure that do they have SSDI income, anything like that. So that's a regular part of the work that they do.
Great.
Can I add to that? Hi, for the record, I'm Jake Dornblazer, the program coordinator for the Safe Rest Village program. A little bit more about the documentation portion of it. When people first start accessing services, they many times are missing ID, social security card, birth certificate, all very essential items to getting any type of benefit, including housing and employment, right? So it's hard to get them into any system or even get them connected to the SSI that they should be collecting if they don't have those documents. So that's why it becomes so important that those essential documents are being collected, is because it is literally the foundation of starting to get them into housing and getting them into stability.
Yes. I'm good.
Great, thank you. Councilor Huang.
Great, thank you, Madam President, and thank you for everyone that came to present. And I want to thank Commissioner Ryan especially for all your work and shepherding this through, and also for the invites. I've been able to attend the grand opening of Menlo Park and Multnomah Safe Rest Village, and it was great to see kind of those on day one. So thank you for that. I'm wondering, in kind of my continued engagement, I've heard a lot of positive reviews from neighbors generally, and I'm wondering how you all think that's going. Like, how are they integrating into the broader community? I'm seeing or I'm hearing about a lot of like positive interactions that maybe people were nervous about at first, but hasn't turned out the way they thought, and in a better way, honestly. So how is that going, and like how are you thinking through kind of like integration into the broader community?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good question. First of all, I was expecting the pushback from neighbors, and I respected the pushback as well. And so it was good to have that type of dialogue. And I have found that most of the neighbors, when I'm out at Multnomah Village, many literally will come up to me and say, "Hey, I was pretty skeptical, and it's going much better than I thought." Most of the areas also, I can say this for sure, Peninsula Crossing is a good example where it wasn't just the area, it's the area around it, because we have the Peninsula Crossing Trail, for example. As you all know, Mary Nolan, I know you know this, Councilor Nolan, it's a really great amenity, a bike path that goes from Columbia Boulevard up to Willamette. People weren't using that for over a decade, because it was always, there was always people camping on it and they just didn't feel safe. So having that amenity back in the neighborhood is a really big deal. So it's about making the area nicer than it was when you found it, and that's really been happening. Also, the buffer zone, which was very controversial, has been very helpful, because it's really helpful for the village participants, because they don't need to be triggered right when they walk out of the village by people that they used to do behavior with that they probably want to move away from if they want to have the resilience to be in housing. All of that said, it's complicated, and especially the ones where we have the villages that really come right up to neighbors, it's tough, and so we're working through some of those. The land that we find that does not have adjacent housing right next to it is easier to work with. So it's just part of what we're dealing with in Portland during this emergency. There's a lot of shared sacrifice. So I'll just end with how much I appreciate the providers doing, the best good neighbor agreements are when they're active one day at a time, so that they're actually connecting with the neighborhood. And one of the reasons it was so hard to build these was because our track record collectively in local government was we put up some temporary shelters during COVID, for example, down on Water Avenue. Mm-hmm. And those weren't very, people weren't loving those at all. And so they saw those pictures and they assumed that's what we were going to duplicate in all their neighborhoods. So I think once we started getting model units up, if you will, and proof points, it's improving. And that's why the task sites that City Council are building are having an easier go-around, because now we have better examples to show what we're building when we put these temporary housing units up. But do you want to add anything to that, Jake, or no?
Yeah, I'm happy to add something. I do a lot of the community engagement around all of our shelters. And one of the things I'll say is, it is that thing, there's this perception of what these are gonna look like before we put them in. And so we face a lot of headwind coming in, and then definitely when they initially open. And after they've been open for a while, we find that we've first learned about the community and kind of what the community needs and how to address issues. We've worked with the community on how they can get their issues addressed. Learning who to communicate with about what issues. And so after villages have been open 3 to 6 months, we find that we pretty much have those streamlined, and we're able to address issues as they come up and meet a lot of the needs of the neighbors. So there's definitely a lot of headwind, and there's definitely a lot of things to work with each community, and every community is different. But overall, it seems to be working very well.
And Andy, the providers, I really like how you've been able to build some volunteer networks with the local neighbors at the schools and such. Do you want to mention anything?
Yeah, and whenever we move into a neighborhood to do any kind of project, our commitment is to be good neighbors. Whether or not there's a written good neighbor agreement in place or not, if we're not being good neighbors, and that includes all of our participants, but also our staff, we want to be considered a resource, not a detriment to the neighborhood. So we have a phone line 24/7 where people can call, but we also create opportunities for supportive neighbors to volunteer and to come. And we have Multnomah Safe Rest Village, we have a book team that comes frequently. We have someone who's volunteered to teach some writing courses. So there's real opportunity for community engagement as well. And that, again, just helps the neighbors to feel that this isn't a homeless shelter that's stuck in their neighborhood. These are neighbors who are being sheltered in their neighborhood.
Awesome, thank you. We have a lot of questions. I'm going to ask every counselor to think about their question, and then we might need follow-up as well, because I think there's a lot of interest in the council. So let's try to keep the answer short, and if we can follow up with more information, thank you. I don't want to cut this conversation short, but anyway. Let's see, we have Counselor Simpson, Lewis, and Gonzalez, and then Counselor Nolan.
Thank you, Council President, and thank you, Commissioner Ryan. Great presentation. Thank you to your staff. Month and a half in, keep killing it. I want to say thank you for sharing your experience. I think that's an experience a lot of families go through in America. I mean, it's commonplace.
It is.
So I empathize with you on that piece. And looking at the numbers, I know 326 compared to what our point in time contact is pretty low. And I know a 3 to 9 month time span. I mean, I get it, These are individual cases where folks, have addiction or behavioral health issues, but the weather's turning. And we're getting ready to hit winter. What's the plan to kind of ramp up getting folks into shelter spaces with continuation of wraparound services so that we can get as many folks off the street and out of, what could possibly be inclement bad winter weather we get later on this year?
Yeah, well, I think what we can all do is as we build more shelters, the larger villages that are coming from the city, the one open at the Clinton Triangle, we have a new Safe Park one that we're proposing out in far North Portland, that we work together to help the community receive these assets. And I think we're starting to see the results that we need. One thing that's been happening over the last decade is the denominator just keeps growing. So we have more people that are becoming chronically homeless on our streets. So this is at least giving us some hope that we're seeing double the success rate and outcomes in terms of when they leave the shelter, they're actually going into permanent housing. The shelters before this, the county has run, it's lower than 25%. So that's something we can start investing in. So I'm hoping that with the scale that we're starting to build with the city's larger villages, that's a step in the right direction.
Absolutely, thank you.
And then of course in severe weather, we all come together and we all partner on providing shelter during those storms. And I think we've all experienced as volunteers how difficult it is when we have people go home into the conditions that are still not great. So, yeah. So as a team, we just have to keep building.
Absolutely. And I'll say I was at that Menlo Park opening, and to your point, I've been around that crazy messiness. Park Rose Community United Church, the Safe Rest Village also in my neighborhood. I heard the folks call the pastor all kinds of names. And guess what? Those villages are actually doing really well in our community, and they're actually helpful. So thank you.
You're so welcome.
All right, Councilor Lewis.
Sure, thank you so much. I want to start by just really thanking you for doing the hard work every day of working with people who have literally the hardest jobs in our community, and that is to be a case manager or a support service worker. They're underpaid, they're overworked, they don't get to leave work at their desk when they go home at night. So thank you. And then Commissioner, thank you for being here today. It is not often that Metro is a stop on the kind of tour that you're doing to build support. And not only Portland, but our entire region has been struggling not only with the crisis, but with an inability to articulate a single unified theory of change. And I don't think that this crisis necessitates a single theory of change, but your solution right here walks pretty consistently across all of the different theories of change that we're gonna need. You're calling it shelter, I look at it as transitional housing, because you have a defined front door and you have a defined back door. I'm pretty impressed by a third of the folks having moved in and found stability. I would continue, or I'd like us to continue to really emphasize that front door, you have a lot of specific ways that you're recruiting people in and helping them feel safe, particularly with your communities being formed around BIPOC and queer identities. So it's not just space-based, it's also you're on the continuum of where people need to be met where they are based on their identity and their experience. People come into homelessness because their relationships are broken. And the first thing that you're working on in those 6 planks that you said, we're working on their relationships with themselves and with the people who are going to continue to care for them in these villages and beyond, and frankly, in the neighborhoods that they're nested within. So just want to thank you for that work, for bringing forward a model that has been innovative and responsive, and then also looking for making sure that we're confronting the idea that the funding is ending sooner than we'd like. With our Tri-County measure, I just want to be very honest and upfront. There's very little funds that come to Metro, and those funds are for data. So if you want to talk data, we can get super nerdy. And I think actually the city's been pretty removed. The county's been deep in. If y'all want to come to that party, it's messy. So welcome. But I think at the end of the day, it's making sure that we have a space where the city and the county can really have an honest conversation about making sure the LIP is followed.
Mm-hmm.
No red flags for me today, having read the entire LIP. It's the longest LIP. I think they could have been briefer. But no red flags about falling outside of the 4 corners of the LIP. So my hope would be that we could find a way that Multnomah County could see funding for this through their LIP implementation.
Data nerd alert. So I think it's going to be really important that we look at who comes from the traditional shelters, who comes from the shelters that were offering a lot of services, and then track that longitudinally for 3 years. My hunch is that we will see a higher success rate of stability for those that have received the services prior to moving in, building that resilience prior. That's a pretty easy hunch to have, but I think we'll only know if we really follow that longitudinal data over the next few years. It's kind of like when I was in the education space, when universities would say, oh, we're enrolling all these great numbers from an equity lens, but then I'd ask, how are they doing 3 years later? And then you'd see the high dropout rates. So, well, great. So they're from a family of poverty and now they're in debt. That's not a success. So it's really about longitudinal data that we must track to make sure that we have the efficacy necessary.
Yeah, and I think that one of the tools that we're going to have to use is that new by names list, because the HMIS isn't in effect at all of those shelters.
No.
So we're operating on 2 islands, and the merge is actually going to be the by names list.
Compliance data never gets you where you want to go. You have to have the innovative data that actually is realistic and meets you on a relational level, and you can track that quantitatively. Yeah.
We're in agreement. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Councilor Gonzalez.
Thanks, President Peterson, and hi to everyone at MRC. I regret not having the opportunity to be there, but Commissioner Ryan, I want to echo the appreciation and gratitude for your work and also for bringing voices that are close to the work to be with us here. Just like Councilor Lewis mentioned, it's not frequent that we're able to engage at the Metro Dais with reports like this, and so it's just something that I really appreciate. There are a lot of things that you mentioned that stuck out to me. One of them was a few years ago the political will and the amount of effort it's taken to materialize programs and projects like this. And we hear over and over again that in this place that we're in, we need all solutions at the table, and we need to be able to innovate and take risks. Saying that is one thing, and then doing it and going through the public process like you and your team has is really remarkable. And this is the kind of work and programs that when the supportive housing services measure was originated and moved through, I think this is a really great example of how we can work across jurisdictions and partnerships to deliver programs. And for the providers in the room, also just want to offer you my sincere respect and admiration for your hard work, for working with humans, for working with people, and embracing every single day that we can't just toss people to the side, and that everyone deserves opportunity, everyone deserves dignity, and that's a really special commitment and a really special bond. So your mission is beautiful. I again just want to say thank you for coming, and it's been really wonderful to have the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Councilor Nolan.
Madam President, I would be interested either here or as a follow-up, if you could provide information about the housing unit or sleeping units per acre at your various sites. Cost per sleeping unit is important, but in a city with land limitations, knowing the density per acre would also be useful.
Yeah, I think we can get back to you with that
Yeah,
information.
I
wouldn't
didn't
have
expect
that.
it would be
Happy
at your
to.
fingertips. Thanks.
It's a very
Thanks.
innovative, smart question. Thank you. Because you're right, it's hard to find the land.
Yeah.
Boy, do we know.
All right. Well, thank you all
Thank
for
you so much.
coming,
Thanks for your
Commissioner.
time.
Thank you for bringing this to us, and we look forward to more conversations.
All right.
More geeky, nerdy
Ashton, we'll
data
see you at
conversations.
the Veterans Day Parade.
Veterans Day,
Yeah,
absolutely. Thank you.
All right, thank you. With that, we'll move on to our consent agenda. Today's consent agenda consists of one item, Resolution Number 23-5358, for the purpose of completing required transition actions to the new 2024-27 MTIP, including adding 9 new projects and updating 2 existing projects to enable future federal fund obligations to occur. Do I have a motion for Resolution Number 23-5358?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilor Lewis and seconded by Councilor Simpson. Any discussion? Seeing no hands raised. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? The motion passes. Thank you. All right. I will move on to ordinance number 23-1503 for the purpose of amending Metro Code Chapter 7.05 Income Tax Administration and 7.06 Personal Income Tax to add certain clarifications and make housekeeping updates. This is a second reading. Councilors, our next agenda item is that second reading and vote on ordinance. We had our first reading and public hearing at our October 26th meeting. We received no public testimony on the ordinance during the public hearing. Here with us today is Josh Harwood, our Metro Fiscal and Tax Policy Director and Metro's Chief of Staff in the Council Office. Any presentation today, Josh?
Sorry, President Peterson. No, we don't have any. We're here to answer any questions if you have.
All right, councilors, any questions for staff? Seeing no hands raised virtually or in person. Councilors, do I have a motion for ordinance number 23-1503 for the purpose of amending Metro Code Chapter 7.05 Income Tax Administration, 7.06 Personal Income Tax to add certain clarifications and make housekeeping updates?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
It's been moved by Councilor Simpson and seconded by Councilor Nolan. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Connor, will you please call the roll?
Yes, thank you. Councilor Lewis.
Aye.
Councilor Nolan.
Yes.
Councilor Simpson.
Aye.
Councilor Wong.
Aye.
Councilor Gonzalez.
Aye.
And President Peterson.
Aye, thank you. Much appreciated. Thank you,
Thank you.
Josh, for running up.
No problem.
All right, we'll move on to other business. Councilors, we are going to go over, oh, no hand raised, okay. We are going to go over now a little bit of our council procedures update. The council procedures capture the guidelines that reflect current council expectations and ensure councilor staff and the public have a shared understanding of operations. Since the last update to the procedures in 2013, our council operations have changed, notably including the use of hybrid meetings. As elected officials, we have a responsibility to the public and our staff to be respectful and present during council meetings and work sessions. The revised procedures in your packet include newly proposed additions to foster a respectful relationship with the public and staff. Today's discussion is intended to create a space for councilors to provide feedback on their preferred ways to foster such respectful relationships. Staff will incorporate your feedback into an updated draft for future council adoption. Today we have both Ina Zucker and Ann Vizzini here to help us from the council office with the proposals. I will turn it over to Ina. Thank you.
Thank you, President Peterson. Hello, councilors. Thank you for the time today. As you'll hear more about from Ann, council procedures you're discussing are meant to reflect how things are done and how you get your work done and function. The document, once it is updated, will be very useful for new councilors and for staff. Thanks to the councilors who already submitted comments on earlier drafts. That was very helpful. And now I also want to thank Ann, who has been working on this project for a number of months. It's been bumped a few times because of more pressing things. So we're really excited to keep this moving forward.
Great, thank you, Ina. President Peterson, councilors, nice to see you. For the record, my name is Ann Buzzini. I'm a policy advisor in your council office. Connor, can you go to the next slide, please? Thanks. The slides today are pretty boring, so they're really just here to ground you if you're visual, but I will reiterate what President Peterson and Ina just mentioned, that the council procedures as a document are really a reflection of current practice, and they do foster that stronger communication and respect between all the folks, whether that's the public, you all, or staff. But I do want to point out also for the top bullet there that the Metro Code actually does specify that certain procedures should be adopted by resolution, and those issues are addressed in the discussion draft that was in your packet. I also wanted to kind of give a little bit of a history for those who may not have caught it, that the last council procedures were updated in 2013, and then President Peterson released a memo in 2021 that sort of clarified some of those procedures and made some, not changes, but really specified some of the relationships and how they should work and the different roles within the council office. And so some of those comments are also incorporated into the discussion draft, but no council has voted on them since 2013. Next slide, please. Most of the changes in the discussion draft from the 2013 version are what I at least would consider housekeeping, tightening of language, reorganization, and things like that. There are also some comments from each of you, as Ina, or not each of you, but some of you, as Ina mentioned, which were incorporated. And I wanted to point out that these are in the discussion draft, and the code sections are noted if you want to be that detailed about it. But these are the types of things that the code requires that you adopt by resolution. So it's things like the order of the meetings and how you want to debate, which typically is just Robert's Rules of Order, and perhaps most importantly for the public, the process for public communication, which of course Connor and President Peterson lay out for folks at every meeting. Next slide, please. These are the substantive updates that are in the draft. So these are proposed in the draft. And what we heard from counselors who did weigh in on the earlier revisions were that it would be helpful to have stronger communication around a few key areas, and one of those is attendance, making sure that the council president or the presiding officer is aware of who will be where now that we're in a hybrid format as well, and also things like communicating in advance any changes to resolutions or ordinances that come forward, or objecting to an item on the consent agenda, just making sure that all of those things are communicated in advance. You can see here typically like 24 to 48 hours, and also providing a little bit more flexibility on those rare occasions where it turns out that most of you can't be here in person, and how those meetings are handled or canceled so that folks who prepared to come and present feel like they get the full attention of the council. And with that, Connor, if you could go to the next slide. I just have some really basic policy questions for you. This is really an opportunity for a public discussion among you all. They're your procedures. They should reflect what you're interested in. The top question there is around the level of detail that you'd like to see. If the document that was provided feels like the right amount of detail, it does go hand in hand with the code, where there's additional detail about the legal requirements. And then if the procedures really reflect your expectations of each other as counselors, and also whether there are any issues where you feel like you need guidance in participating or leading these meetings where it is absent from the procedures. And I will leave it at that.
Thank you. Thank you both. The difficulty of moving into hybrid space is, as we have come back, what should we expect from each other, both of staff and of council and between us as counselors? And so we tried to put a proposal together and tried to also weigh, I mean, things come up. And we do have this ability to do hybrid. So this isn't meant to be punitive. It's basically just for the ability to be able to respectfully deal with quick changes where we might not end up with an entire council and we've asked staff to be in the room. Or we have asked people to come testify and suddenly we're all virtual, and just the perception that that can create, or there's only one person here all by themselves. So just trying to figure out how to manage for those things that have popped up over the last 6 to 9 months. Has it been a year? Feels like it's been several. It is, it really is. Physics just, so any comments on some of these? Yeah, Councilor Nolan?
I think it's perfectly reasonable to have that kind of flexibility. I'd be happy if it was complete flexibility, but more than, or fewer than 4 in the room is certainly a good threshold. That's a quorum, and it's a requirement to pass ordinances, so that's fine. I would like to make clear on the notices that we're talking about business days. So if we, and I would actually, except for things that truly cannot be done ahead of time, I think it would help the efficiency of council deliberation if we had information 72 or 3 days in advance. That would mean Friday for a work session and Monday for a council meeting. Gives us time to absorb it, chat among ourselves, not in a quorum that precipitates a notice requirement, or even consult with our constituents or people of it who have a stake in the question. So that would be my preference, but I appreciate the effort that you've done.
Thank you. I think I probably had something more onerous. We went back to 24 hours. So I thank you for that.
They've got 48 in here, which is 2 days.
Yeah.
And in
Councilors?
reality, what we really do strive to get you all the materials in the packets 1 week in advance. That's sort of our best practice internally, even though that's not what is going in the council procedures document. But it will of the council if you want it to be 72 instead of 48.
Okay, I'm just going to ask for clarification because those two concepts don't come together in my head at all. There's a requirement for the council to be prepared, and then there's a requirement for a counselor to let notice that they will not be attending. Those two seem different, and I don't so if I'm missing something, Ina, please let me know what you were thinking.
Madam President, I was addressing with my comment an obligation for staff to have information to us 72 hours before it appears on a public meeting agenda, either a work session or a business meeting.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
And I totally support the 24-hour requirement for known absences.
Was it 48 or 24?
I think it's 24 here. I
Okay,
have the slide.
thank you.
It was 48 for the staff
materials.
giving it to us, and then
Yes.
24 for us letting you or Connor know if we'll be out.
That's correct. And also 24 hours notice for changes to the consent agenda, or if someone plans to make a motion on legislation.
There we go. Thank you. Appreciate that. I thought you were referring to advance notice for counselors not being here, so my bad. So just going back to the getting information to council, because this applies to the entire agency, and we have had a difficulty, I'm going to be just a little clear, that we've been trying to get information to the council within a week. And what we're referencing now is if there's a last minute change or a change to a PowerPoint, but that PowerPoint should have been provided a week in advance. Correct?
Well,
I don't want to say that I am now saying we are now putting down on paper that staff can wait until the last second, which is 48 hours or 72 hours or whatever, that we are still very clear that it is a week and we need people to be more in the
Yes.
direction of the week than, okay.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay,
You said it better than I.
I'm trying to, okay, without having it right here. This isn't my computer, so I have no idea how to pull anything up. So I don't have the language in front of me, so I apologize.
Ain't technology grand?
Do you want an honest answer? Counselors, any other comments, questions?
I see Counselor Gonzalez has his hand up.
Oh, Counselor Gonzalez, apologies. Technology.
It's okay. It's okay. Yeah, I mean, just to answer the questions that you have on the slide for us, I do think that generally the proposed changes, I think they do reflect the expectations that I have, and appreciate the work done to bring this to us. I do have just a general question for 48 hours prior to meetings. If a council work session is on a Tuesday morning, that would be on a Sunday morning. So are we talking like business hours or like hours? Just generally want to make sure that people don't have the expectation that they're doing this by, a Sunday, and that, anyway, yeah, just if you could answer that question.
Yeah, thank you for the clarification. It is business hours, and if I understood Councilor Nolan's question correctly, that was the same concern, so we'll clarify that. And it sounds like for meeting materials, I'm sensing that the council is in agreement that 72 hours would be appropriate.
Okay.
Business hours.
Yeah, okay, excellent, thank you. And, in general, I appreciate that we're also providing some hopefully shared agreements as a council and for the council president as well in terms of the decision-making for the in-person and the virtual decision-making, because obviously in-person meetings have quite a bit of effort and labor that goes into setting them up and things like that. So I think it's great to have that, and just also the expectation for us to have our cameras on while we're on the meeting. So just want to call those things out. They look good to me, and appreciate it coming forward.
Thank you. And just remind me what that requirement for cameras on, the kind of what we talked about.
The way it's included in your draft is simply that they should be on for the duration of the meeting, and that was the specificity that I drafted, but I'm open to your feedback.
All right, Councilor Huang,
sorry.
and then Lewis. Councilor Gonzalez.
Oh, sorry, President Peterson. I think maybe, we can add maybe a clause or some comma. Obviously, if we have a poor connection and we can only call in without video, you know what I mean? Then there should be exceptions to it, but generally speaking, yes, if we have strong connection, we should be. Just want to make sure there's that nuance.
Yeah, and in that case, I think we had talked, a little bit about advance notice or some sort of statement. I think counselors should feel like they can then explain why they're off camera so that it's in the record, and those participating understand that they're not online because of a weak connection, or no video because of a weak connection. But I think it behooves us each individually to make a statement of why
Yes, and to avoid having too much paper, I didn't print the specific discussion draft, but if my memory serves me, it is drafted in a way that when you provide notice that you'll be attending virtually, you would kind of give a little explanation to Connor of like, this is what's up. And so we can make that more specific too for like camera-related issues and connection issues.
Okay, thanks. Counselor Wong, and then Lewis.
Great. Thank you, Madam President, and thanks for working on these. I think these are much needed improvements. I do have a question on the kind of interactions with staff and the 2 hours of agency work time. I would want a little more information on like who's the arbiter of 2 hours? Is it like 2 hours of junior staff time, or is it 2 hours of senior staff time? Just because I think, you know, and I don't believe that staff is doing this, but that 2 hours is like, I don't want to do it because it could be more than 2 hours. So I think maybe just a little more clarity there. And then, you know, like one example I had from last year was, you know, I wanted to see a list of all our community grants that were given to partners. And I thought it would be like, click a few buttons and it would spit it out. But I was told it was a major undertaking, and that's why we've created a budget note around that. But that's just like an example of like things that I think should take 10 minutes are actually like major undertakings. So yeah, just maybe working with the CO's office to maybe flesh that out a little bit more about like, what does that mean by the 2 hours?
Sure, happy to do that.
And with regard to the example that you gave, the work that's being done is all being done in the council office. So that's work that Johannes is doing, that interns have helped with. So the council office is not part of the 2 hour rule, just so you know.
Great, Counselor Lewis.
Sure, thank you so much. I think I wrote at length for the discussion draft, so I have nothing to add. My thoughts and comments are reflected. And I want to thank Anne for reading my notes because I believe I wrote them and I did not type them. The one thing that comes to mind for me that I didn't address earlier, and I don't think is the meat and potatoes of what we're talking about today, but is the value that can come out of counselor communication. We often shortchange it. We are often exhausted. We don't eat lunch, and then it's 1 o'clock. So I would like to make some sort of note that the presiding officer or president has the right to bring counselor communication to the front of the agenda, particularly if it's been shortchanged for the previous couple of meetings. I would say the same for COO communication as well. Just in terms of order of operations, sometimes there are important things, it should be brought to the front, not the back.
Sure. All right. I think we have gotten all the input.
Great.
And I don't think any of us disagree with anybody else's comments. If so, say no. All right, well, thank you. Much appreciated for the work on this. And next step is to bring it before the council for adoption.
That's right, thank you. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to our last conversation for today. It is on waste prevention, environmental services, garbage and recycling system facilities plan proposed scenarios. As you'll all recall, the project team is back today to provide an opportunity for council deliberation and feedback on the 4 scenarios that were developed to outline different ways Metro could choose to invest in facilities and infrastructure or take other actions to reduce waste, fill gaps, and address challenges at existing Metro facilities and throughout the region. Marisa and I had a conversation this morning that I would just like to use as a framework for this conversation today, have some feedback on the scenarios and do some back and forth and listening to each other. And then I asked Marisa to come back with a COO recommendation on kind of the hybrid so that we can have that final conversation as next step. So if that's okay with council, we'll be in listening and talking mode today and not on like trying to craft something mid-air while flying the plane. That sounds great. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Marta, our Metro Waste Prevention Environmental Services Director. Thank you.
Thank you, President Peterson and councilors. Again, my name is Marta McGuire, Waste Prevention and Environmental Services Director. I use she, her pronouns. And I have here with me Esty Siegel and Luis Sandoval, principal planners leading the development of the systems plan. And we also have here with us Lindsay Lopez from Jacobs Consulting that has been leading the technical work on the plan development. As President Peterson shared, we are here today to provide an overview of the 4 conceptual scenarios that were shared at the Reuse, Recycling, and Garbage System Symposium held in September and through several other engagements. Today, we're going to have the opportunity to walk through the scenarios in more detail, answer questions, and share next steps. Next slide. The symposium was Waste Prevention and Environmental Services' first major in-person event in a number of years, bringing together more than 120 stakeholders. And I'm pleased to share that we were thrilled about the attendance and received a lot of positive feedback from the engagement. Thank you to the counselors that attended. I also want to thank Anna and Jackie for their participation in the forum, testifying today, and for their continued engagement in the plan development. In the morning, the symposium attendees got to hear from the same international panel that presented at council. From those panelists, as you may recall, were from New Zealand, Sweden, Vancouver, BC, and Boulder, Colorado. The goal of this forum was to share examples from around the world, really to spark creative thinking and discussion on how our region can best meet our regional waste plan goals before asking the participants to learn about and discuss the conceptual scenarios. Next slide. We developed a discussion guide to provide information around the project, the process that we have been going through, describe the scenarios, benefits, and challenges, and explain how they were evaluated. This guide, which you received as an attachment in the staff report, provides links to more detailed information on the technical analysis and evaluation criteria. Participants use this guide and information to learn about and engage in discussion before completing a survey to collect their input and preferences on the scenarios. And we are going to be sharing those survey results at the next work session next month. We wanted to have the opportunity just to spend a little bit more time with you today around the scenarios itself before we share the results of the forum and other engagements. We also had the opportunity to engage the Metropolitan Mayors Consortium. They had a special meeting and a number of mayors attended, particularly from the west side, to provide their input. And I'm pleased to share that as a part of that engagement, they provided some positive feedback around Metro's outreach efforts and that they're feeling that we're being more transparent. And I really appreciated the conversation around the systems plan development. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Esty.
Hi, good morning. I'm Esty Siegel. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a principal planner in WPES. And the next slide, please. So as you know, the current distribution of facilities in our region means that some people have easy access to services such as household hazardous waste or furniture disposal, while others do not. The purpose of this project is to determine and seek agreement on the right set of capital investments for Metro to make to realize goals in the 2030 Regional Waste Plan. This plan will clarify Metro's future role in providing facility-based services, including facilities to be built or renovated by Metro or in cooperation with public, private, and nonprofit partners. It will also clarify future policies, programs, or other actions Metro may want to take to reduce waste, increase access, keep ratepayer costs affordable, and improve the resiliency of our system. Next slide, please. And you can, you can wait here. I'd like to give a very brief overview or review of the project phases and what we've done and what lies ahead. So next click, please. So the project started out by identifying a set of values and outcomes to guide the development of the plan and its implementation, which you endorsed in September 2022. Next click, please. In phase 2, we engaged 4 groups of project stakeholders: industry, local government, reuse and repair businesses, and community members, as well as the project's community advisory group, to identify facility and infrastructure gaps in the existing garbage and recycling system based on their lived experience and their expertise. We summarized this in an engagement report that we presented to Council in February 2023. Next, please. We then researched existing facilities and material streams using geospatial analysis to identify gaps in 14 different material streams. And then we summarized these gaps in a technical analysis report and on the project website. Next, please. Evaluation criteria were developed from the project values and outcomes to be able to conceptually measure the potential impacts of the scenarios. You can go forward one. Staff presented an overview of the technical analysis and evaluation criteria to council in mid-September. You can click again, please. So now we are in phase 3 and we're developing and reviewing the scenarios, which is what we're here to review with you today. Final phases of the project, next please, will include proposing a set of preferred scenario elements to be included in a draft plan and implementation strategy in phase 4, and then to develop the final plan in phase 5. Staff will return to council to review and seek input on major deliverables in each phase. You can click through once, and then the next slide, please. So there are 3 primary tools that Metro can use to address facility gaps. Number 1, Metro could build new facilities and or renovate its existing transfer stations to address specific facility gaps and provide better services in different parts of the region. Or 2, Metro could provide funding to businesses and nonprofits to increase the collection of items for reuse and recycling using their own facilities, equipment, and methods. Or 3, Metro could implement a range of policies and programs, such as increasing requirements on private garbage and recycling facilities and or city or county collection programs. Metro could also create programs to encourage, rather than require, cities, counties, and private facilities to expand their services. Next slide. So the 4 scenarios that staff developed to address facility gaps apply the tools that I just went over in different ways. The scenarios were developed with the goal of presenting a range of approaches to address gaps that are intended to be different from each other so that they can more clearly highlight differences in terms of cost, feasibility, impact on reducing waste, impact to the environment, and other factors. The project team fully expects that the ideal or most preferred scenario will be a combination of elements from multiple scenarios. So now I'd like to turn it over to Lindsay from Jacobs, our primary consultant on the project, who will describe the first 2 scenarios.
Thanks, Esty. Good afternoon, counselors. My name is Lindsay Lopez. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the project manager from Jacobs, which is the lead consultant on the consulting team supporting this project. We've been assisting Metro throughout the project, and in the current phase, we led the scenario evaluation and the modeling that you'll hear a little bit more about today. And today, Luis and I will each run through 2 of the scenarios, and for each scenario, we'll provide an overview of the scenario and then show a summary of the evaluation results. You can follow along with the slides and or the discussion guide. If you turn to page 11, we'll be talking about each of those items as well. So let's get started with the baseline. The baseline is the business as usual or status quo scenario. This scenario shows that what would happen if Metro continues to do pretty much what it is doing today, with no major investments in facilities or other infrastructure. The main purpose of this scenario is so that we can compare other scenarios to the current trajectory. In the baseline scenario, Metro would make only essential capital improvements to keep its 2 existing transfer stations running. Next slide, please. So this, I just wanted to point out, is the map that we're going to be talking about that shows the overview, and each of the elements that are part of this scenario are shown in that map. So next slide, please. The baseline scenario, as well as the other 3 scenarios, were assessed using 6 categories of evaluation criteria. These were based on the values and outcomes mentioned previously, and for all the criteria, a score of 1 to 5 was determined, with 1 being a low score and 5 being the highest or the best score. A variety of tools, models, and assumptions were utilized in the analysis to determine these scores. And for each scenario, I'm going to give a short overview of the evaluation results, starting with the baseline here. As the slide shows, the baseline scenario scores well in the low-cost category because it only includes essential improvements to existing Metro transfer stations. The baseline scenario does not make progress towards meeting Metro's goals, and it scores low in all other categories because it does not include added facilities or services to address the gaps that were identified. In this scenario, the average garbage collection bill for a single-family household is expected to increase to $39 per month by 2040. This figure is expressed in today's dollars, and that is without adding the impact from inflation. This is another $1.30 more than what the average monthly bill is today. In terms of waste reduction, an estimated 1.13 million tons of materials would be recovered each year for reuse, recycling, and composting. This is the lowest of all 4 scenarios and will be useful to consider as we compare the other scenarios. Next slide, please. Under the full-service scenario, Metro would build 4 modern full-service transfer stations and 2 regional reuse facilities. We named this scenario full service because it focuses on building large, multi-purpose facilities, especially transfer stations that serve multiple types of customers in one place. In this scenario, Metro would fully redevelop its 2 existing transfer stations, Metro Central and Metro South. It would build a new facility on the Metro Central-owned Cornelius site and would look for a site in East Multnomah County for a new transfer station in that portion of the region. Unlike Metro transfer stations today, these new transfer facilities would be able to have state-of-the-art areas for the public to drop off items for reuse and recycling, and would be able to collect more food waste from commercial haulers than they can today. Under this scenario, Metro would also buy or lease property to establish 2 new regional reuse facilities, 1 reuse warehouse hub and 1 reuse mall, both of which would run in partnership with reuse organizations and businesses. The reuse hub would expand the capacity of organizations and businesses to process donated items for reuse, do minor repairs or improvements to those items, and provide space to store seasonal products or large quantities of donated items. The reuse mall would offer a convenient one-stop shop location where people can drop off materials as well as shop for all sorts of used and refurbished goods. The concept of a reuse mall not only supports providing convenient reuse shopping opportunities for residents in one place, but it also helps strengthen the trend of buying used items and making secondhand shopping a first choice. Next slide, please. The full-service scenario scores well in environment, access, and jobs, and moderately well in resilience. The large regional transfer stations and reuse facilities associated with this scenario provide the most opportunity for additional material recovery and potential new jobs while increasing access to facilities. However, it scores the lowest in the cost category as this requires the most investment from Metro to complete due to multiple capital-intensive projects. The large regional transfer stations in this scenario also have the highest environmental justice impact on the communities that these facilities are built in. The estimated single-family garbage and recycling collection bill associated with this scenario in 2040 is $41.80, which is the second highest across all the scenarios, and a $2.80 per month more than in the baseline. In this scenario, an estimated 1.29 million tons of material would be recovered each year for reuse, recycling, and composting, which is 160,000 tons more than the baseline. I'd now like to pass it to Luis to do the other 2 scenarios.
Thank you, Lindsay, and good afternoon, Metro Council President. Good afternoon, Metro Councilors. For the record, my name is Luis Sandoval. I am a Principal Planner in the Waste Prevention and Environmental Services Department, and I use he, him pronouns. I will now move on to a brief description of the distributed scenario. Next slide, please. In this scenario, Metro would build a network of mid-sized facilities, at least 2 in each county, designed to make it easier and more convenient for the public and commercial haulers to drop off a variety of materials. For the public, Metro would build a total of 5 facilities with state-of-the-art reuse and recycling centers where the public can take items for reuse, recycling items that are not accepted at the curb, yard debris, garbage, and some of the most common household hazardous waste items, including those accepted at Metro neighborhood collection events. These facilities would also have retail space for one or more reuse organizations and businesses to sell used and refurbished items, and also warehouse space for storing, processing, and repairing used items collected from the public. Metro would build these facilities by redeveloping the existing Metro South transfer station in Oregon City, by building 2 new facilities, one in East Multnomah County and another one in the Beaverton-Tigard area in Washington County, by co-locating a public facility on the vacant site that Metro currently owns in Cornelius, and by co-locating a small reuse and recycling center at the existing RID deployment center in Northeast Portland. In the distributed scenario, commercial haulers and business self-haul customers like contractors and landscapers would be served at 3 separate facilities: at Metro Central, at a new commercial facility in Clackamas County, and at another new facility co-located with the public facility in Cornelius. These commercial facilities would accept more or less the same materials that Metro transfer stations accept from haulers today, including the full range of household hazardous waste materials that are currently accepted at Metro facilities, plus more food waste. Next slide, please. The distributed scenario scores well in environment, access, jobs, and environmental justice, and moderately high in resilience. It scores well in environment due to increases in material recovery of about 100,000 tons more per year compared to the baseline, especially food waste at commercial facilities and materials for reuse and recycling at public facilities. Environmental justice scores the best compared to the other scenarios, as it creates community-friendly reuse and recycling facilities that are less intrusive than some of the larger facilities in other scenarios. It scores moderately in terms of cost, raising the average monthly garbage bill for single-family homes by $1.70 by 2040. Overall, the network of distributed mid-sized facilities in this scenario is less costly to build and operate than the facilities in the full-service scenario. Next slide, please. So now we're going to move on to the last of the 4 scenarios. The no-build scenario shows how Metro could address facility gaps without building any new facility, and instead using 3 main sets of tools, which Esty described before. That is increased regulation of private facilities and local governments, more investments in private and nonprofit facilities, and renovation of Metro's existing facilities. The specific policies and programs that were included in this scenario are meant to represent some of the possible options available to Metro, but this is not an exhaustive list. Some of the ideas for new regulations include Metro requiring cities and counties to collect more materials through the curbside collection system, and setting the standard for cities and counties to require all residents to subscribe to garbage collection service. The idea here is to nudge people to use curbside collection more so that we can reduce the need for public facilities for people to drop off materials. Another key policy is regulating the rates that private facilities charge for accepting wet and dry waste from commercial haulers. With all facilities charging the same or very similar rates, haulers could choose to go to the nearest facility and pay the same price regardless of where they are located in the region. Another policy tool Metro could use to address gaps in this scenario is to invest in private and nonprofit facilities. To do that, the no-build scenario proposes creating a fee like the regional system fee, but to be used exclusively to increase the capacity of reuse organizations and businesses to divert more materials from the landfill through grants or other types of funding. Metro could also invest in private garbage and recycling facilities through grants, for example, so that there are more facilities that accept materials from the public and haulers in areas where this is the most needed, including new recycling depots or more facilities that accept food from commercial haulers. Lastly, the no-build scenario considers the renovation of existing Metro facilities, including the 2 existing transfer stations. And with these renovations, Metro could offer better recycling depots for the public and make some improvements to facilities to increase customer and worker safety. However, Metro transfer stations would still have limited to no capacity to support recovery of materials for reuse. In the no-build scenario, Metro would sell the vacant site in Cornelius, since Metro would not be building any new facilities. Next slide, please. The no-build scenario scores moderately high in environment, access, and environmental justice due to improvements in waste reduction and access through expanded curbside service and private facility upgrades. The no-build scenario scores moderately in terms of jobs and resilience and low in low cost. The scenario had the worst score in the low cost category due to the relatively high impact on monthly garbage bills paid by households, with an increase of $10.40 by 2040 compared to the baseline. This is because of the high cost of adding new curbside programs. In this scenario, an estimated 1.22 million tons of materials would be recovered for reuse, recycling, and composting, which is about 90,000 tons more per year than in the baseline. This concludes the overview of the scenarios, so I will hand it back to Esty now to talk about next steps.
Thanks. And just one last slide with next steps. And so just to let you know that we've received substantial input on the scenarios to date from the symposium, the survey, and a number of follow-up meetings that we've held with stakeholders. And we look forward to hearing your input and questions and discussion today. As you can see on this slide, we have extended the plan completion schedule through the end of 2024 to ensure that there will be enough time to work collaboratively with project stakeholders to build a strategy that has broad regional support. So following this meeting, we will be working to summarize all the input that we have received in an engagement summary report, which we will bring back to you for review and discussion in December. At this meeting, in a few short weeks, staff will also describe how we plan to use the input, research, and analysis to develop a proposed list of preferred scenario elements in the next phase of the project, but we'd love to talk with you about that a little bit today too, as you said at the beginning. In phase 4, staff will develop and bring a list of preferred scenario elements to council in February 2024 for review, discussion, and for council to specify and vote on the elements and actions they want to be further detailed and included in the draft plan. And then in June, we will ask council to review and provide direction on the selected and detailed draft plan elements, which will include a list of the specific capital projects and level of investment, the programs and policies to be implemented with an expected implementation timeline, and a financing plan. Also at this time, staff will share the draft components of what we're calling an implementation strategy, which would include guidance for siting and design of any new facilities that are decided on, and then indicators to measure the success of the plan over time. If council approves the draft plan and implementation strategy components, a more detailed draft will be developed and then brought to council for further direction in September. And then staff will prepare the final plan for your consideration for adoption in November, December. That is our working schedule at this point. Just one last note that we have built time for review and collecting input from Metro's 3 advisory committees, as well as the project community advisory committee, advisory group, we call it, before each time we come back to council to review the major deliverables. So now, we have a question slide, but just hand it back to Marta or Council President Peterson to lead us through the discussion.
Thank you. A lot to chew on. Councilor Gonzalez had a question during the actual presentation. I didn't know how to, you were on a roll, so just let you go. So could we go back to the slide, any one of the scenario slides with the rating system on it?
Which scenario was it?
Any one of those scenarios with the stars. Councilor Gonzalez, your question.
Yes, thank you so much, President Peterson. I had a general question around the stars, because some of them are metro specific and some of them feel region system specific. So, when we're talking about the baseline for these items, are we talking specifically about the metro universe? Are we talking about public services universe? Or are we talking about the entire system universe? if that makes any sense in terms of the jobs rating or the access rating and things like that. Just a very, very foundational question that I wasn't able to understand.
Can I mind if I start? Thanks for your question. So it depends on the criteria you're talking about. Most of the criteria are mostly centered around the metro region itself and the facilities and services that are located within the region. However, there are a couple of the criteria, and for instance, the jobs criteria that do look at the regional element and then also how many jobs overall. As you know, with the waste sector, there's materials coming in and going out to different places, and so that is something that can go outside of the region. But generally, most of the other criteria are focused on the metro regional area. Does that answer your question, Counselor?
Yeah, sorry. I think, no, not really. Maybe I'm not asking it well, but
Okay.
I mean, this is, so for example, let me just focus in on jobs. When we're talking about jobs, we're not just talking about jobs at Metro, right? Or just jobs, we're talking about every single layer of public, private, nonprofit. The ranking of jobs is across that entire ecosystem, or are we mostly talking about jobs that pertain to Metro?
Good question. So that jobs criteria is the one that is a little bit different. And so there's a couple of sub-criteria in each of the criteria, and in jobs, we look at the actual number of Metro jobs and then also the number of jobs that would be as a result of these changes. So that would be things that are with private entities and that are with reuse entities, those sort of things as well. It also looked at, where those jobs are going to be, what sort of portions of the region, and had an environmental justice component as well. So we take all of that information together, and that's where that combined score comes from. The details of each of the criteria can be found, however, in the attachment that's the technical memo, and it goes in a lot more detail there for each of these criteria.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I was that answers my question fully, and we'll return it to the council president to facilitate conversation. Thanks.
Thank you, Counselor. We have a bunch of hands raised, so Counselor Huang, Lewis, and Nolan.
Great, thank you, Madam President. Just kind of following up from our conversation from Tuesday and, the last couple weeks, and kind of just, following up on Councilor Gonzalez's question around, like, how does this process fit into kind of the bigger picture? And, I suspect, we'll have some sort of transparency conversation going forward. So it seems like we're gonna be doing that, like, rate transparency conversation process simultaneously with this planning process. So I'm wondering, how they might, intersect so that we can make the best decisions. And one of the questions I would have is, what are the various scenarios, how does that impact tonnage allocation? If we're at 40% now at our transfer stations, does that mean that full service will be substantially higher? Because I think that also substantially impacts the rate transparency conversation. So I'm just wondering, how they fit together, and do our partners have the capacity to engage on all these different levels simultaneously across the next, 6 to 12 months? And I also did want to just like uplift the asks of our reuse partners, and like how they're being considered in this process now. I saw in the distributed model there was warehouse space, but does that mean there's not like warehouse space in other scenarios? So just a lot of like big picture, like how does it all fit together funding wise, like programmatic wise, like, then we'll also be going through the Recycling Modernization Act. So that's another process that we have to figure out. So it just seems like a lot of stuff we gotta do in a year, and not sure how we get to that final decision point, given all these different processes that are unfolding?
That's a great question, and maybe I could start with the first part, and then I also would like the project team to weigh in. As you think about the rate transparency and the systems facilities project, in my mind, how they fit together is around Metro's role. In both of these areas, we have different levers around providing direct service and allocation of tonnage within the garbage and recycling system. Luis can speak a little bit more to the allocation of tonnage within these system scenarios is a lever, and it does impact cost and Metro's role in services provided. So I think it would be helpful if we dive into that a little bit more. So I think you called attention to sort of that connection.
Kind of seems like a chicken and egg, right? It's like we want to know the tonnage allocation to help determine pricing, but that would help us determine, you know, which of these scenarios.
Right. So for the short-term project, some of the efforts around wanting to push that forward is because that is data that we don't have around the cost of service for wet waste. Having that data point can help inform planning for the future and having a better understanding of what that cost is. We know what it is for public facilities, but we don't know relative to others. So that is also another intersection of this plan and wanting to have that information. Around the lever of allocations, I'll let Esty and Luis sort of speak to how that plays a role in each of the different scenarios, because there are different assumptions around that.
Yes, thank you, Martha. Thank you, Councilor Huang, for the questions. So the scenarios are trying to address facility gaps not only in terms of access. We also heard gaps in terms of cost differences. And so that's where rate transparency and the issue of rate regulation in the no-bill scenario versus building facilities comes into play. So in essence, we are showing the trade-off of how can Metro Council address the cost differences across the region faced by commercial haulers and by self-haul customers. So we hear those two comments and observations all the time. So in the no-bill scenario, the way to address the cost differences across the region would be to set a maximum rate or to set rates that are more even or the same across the region, right? In the other two scenarios, you would be addressing those gaps by providing a Metro alternative that is in theory going to be, in practice it usually is a cheaper alternative for haulers. So you're addressing it through competition in a way, by putting an alternative in areas where there are no Metro transfer stations. And so in terms of the tonnage allocations, all scenarios assume the 40% in Metro code right now to Metro transfer station. That is the floor, right? It's a minimum to Metro transfer stations. And in the full service, we did assume an increase to 60% of wet waste tonnage flowing to Metro facilities, because that would build two more public facilities. It is an assumption in the scenario. Metro Council could decide we keep 40%, but that will raise the operational cost at Metro transfer stations. And so there is that trade-off again of how much do you want to lower rates versus provide tonnage to private facilities, right?
And are we considering the impact of private facilities? Like if we go to 60 to 80%, does that mean they'll have to consolidate or close? Do we analyze that piece?
So we that is really hard to be, especially because of the issue with access to data, right? Because we cannot anticipate the pricing decisions of private facilities if Metro were to raise or decrease or increase or decrease tonnage. We do, however, have some experience with the tonnage allocation program, and since we moved to a goals-based tonnage allocation, there has been significant shifts of tonnage across different private facilities. And you have seen some facilities facing significant decreases in tonnage, and some facilities seeing significant increases in tonnage. And the pricing behavior hasn't changed that much, in my opinion, as staff. No transfer station has gone out of business so far.
So if I could, I think this is a key point that I think all the counselors are gonna wanna talk about, and I would try to frame it a little differently than, we've gotten the STAR system. I think that's good information to have as generic information. But I think that Councilor Wong is pointing out a key aspect that was not brought up in the values and outcomes that is part and part, I was gonna say it again. Councilor Lewis has pointed out to me that I use the word part and parcel too much. Sorry. Now I'm catching myself every time. I think that we need to have a conversation as part of whatever comes out of the COO recommendation of what is Metro's role, and I don't think it's been framed quite yet in the right way to get there. And I would just say, do you want to stabilize us as is in terms of keeping our rates low, keeping our tonnage constant, or are we willing to raise rates a bit, or are we willing to, because this is what it comes down to, right? Out of all this, yes, we want to achieve some things, and you can get conversation about going about what we want to achieve, but on the fundamental decision that will be made is what is our role in this region, and what are we doing to rates, and what are we doing to the marketplace and the tonnage allocation, and what is that private-public partnership, not just the CBO partnership with the public sector that we want to achieve, but what are we doing inside that system? This has huge ramifications. And what I don't feel like the council is totally set on is what are we willing to do in an environment where we know everybody wants us to reduce our tax rate on everything else that we're doing, right? And so I would just say, I think that's a key component of what we need to get down to in order to, I think we can have a conversation about what types of services and how big or how small, but I think it comes down to how do we phase it? What is the impact on the rates? What is the impact on the tonnage? What are we creating instability or instability within the market? So I would just like to reframe this, because I think this is the key point, and we'll spend all of our time individually as counselors wanting to talk about this. But we need to get something out of this conversation about these scenarios today as well. So, Marisa, did you want to weigh in?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, President Peterson and councilors. I think, let me see if I can tease this out, because I think what I'm hearing from council is a sensitivity to the impact of any of these scenarios on the existing marketplace or the existing private entities that are involved in the wet waste system.
And customers.
And customers, absolutely, yes. And I think that we have a lot of the customer side of it captured, but I'm hearing that we may not have captured this other impact. And so I think it would be helpful to hear from council, you know, if there is a high level value, that one of the things that you want to get out of these scenarios is to not destabilize the existing players, or not, destabilize some aspect of the existing ecosystem, that we just get that on the table, so that as we run through these scenarios and try to estimate the impacts, because the tonnage, moving it one way or another is going to have an impact. You know, building new facilities have an impact. So if there's a particular lens you would like us to apply to that, or a value, I think we can do that. Let's get it on the table.
Yeah, I guess what I wrote down, and I'll look at Councilor Wong, because you started this conversation, and then look at the other counselors. Is there a value to keep the metro rate as low as possible? I don't know what that means yet, but is there a value is that what the council wants to achieve, or is it to allow for moderate increases, and what does that look like? I don't know what that answer is. Is there and this would be the lens, right? So we can talk about what services we think need to be provided, what safety issues need to be dealt with, what partnerships need to be increased to be able to go to our mission. But if there's a lens that starts to narrow down the options, that's what I'm trying to get at. Keep Metro percent of tonnage constant, or is it a moderate growth, or is it phenomenal? And then what does that mean? Because I don't think that we have a complete picture of what that means. And then I would say that those are the two. And then that really goes back to the goals-based tonnage. Because if we're trying to achieve goals within this conversation, both on rate transparency and the facilities, and they kind of start to overlap, in my opinion, what are we actually getting out of the goals-based tonnage, which then plays into this whole conversation. So these are a lot of moving pieces, but I feel like we need to get clarity about what lens are we asking you to put on? Are we good with existing, moderate, or huge growth? And then what does that mean?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. I think we, as council, need to really have a conversation about what is it that we're hoping to achieve. And I'm not really sure how to best facilitate that, but I think just, I use the term North Star a lot, but what is our North Star in our waste management system? And I'm not entirely clear. And just, kind of in the conversations, just on the, transparency study, we're balancing, protecting our constituents and consumers from, maybe price gouging, we're not sure, but also, private transfer stations that don't want to release information to us because we're their competitor, which also makes sense to me. So we're balancing kind of those competing interests, and the scenarios ahead of us are, much more impactful than just that study. So, without a clear set of end goals, I think it's just really hard to really dive specifically into which one of these scenarios do we go down.
Can I just quickly respond, just remind you just that we did set some values and outcomes, and they're high level, and I do appreciate this conversation, but I think, having come to you before over the last year, discussing the values and outcomes, and then also just framing it, I think what we've heard is really what we're striving for with this plan is reducing waste, increasing access, affordability, and increasing the system resiliency. Those are sort of the four. The values and outcomes are helpful, and they're right out of the regional waste plan. The outcomes are specific to this project. But really, that's what we've heard from you over the last 4 to 6 months, loud and clear. And so, but I think the conversation about level of investment is really key too within that. But I just wanted to ask, are those four right?
Well, let's go down the row, because I know we all want to talk. I just wanted to pull this out because I think this is like the linchpin at this point of how the council is going to be looking at with that lens. And I think that's really key to just call it out because it is so important that I think counselors are going to be providing you information on what services they want out of these scenarios, but they also want to know, is this changing our role? And how significantly is it changing Metro's role? And how significantly is it impacting ratepayers? That's a big part of what I think is now, I don't think it's different. I think affordability is in here, but it's an uber overall umbrella question with everything that we've been talking about. So I'm gonna go down the line now. Councilor Luis Gonzalez Simpson, and Councilor Nolan's computer has just quit, so we'll put you in the queue there.
Our batteries died.
Oh, y'all died, all right.
I think that thing isn't on. Ours is on, but the other one doesn't have a light.
All right, well, we'll come back to you.
Okay, I'm here.
Councilor Luis Gonzalez Simpson, and then Nolan.
Yeah, sure, thank you. I really appreciate the work that's gone into this. And I guess I am thinking a little bit more about the intro that we got 3 weeks ago and was kind of confused because we didn't consider the future state of these Recycling Modernization Act investments. We were kind of warned of them, and then I thought maybe we would get a little bit more context about these choices in light of those. In particular, I'm gonna make an analogy that's not gonna totally make sense for everybody, but for council, I look at tonnage as kind of our roadway capacity issue, and that some of the most important things that we can be working for are the individual interactions, what we would consider more boutique services. And that's where we have to stand up for the pedestrian who wants to cross the street safely and not just the car that wants to drive down as quickly as possible. So when I look at what we need to do in terms of evaluating where to put our investment, the need for public service is really in continuing to invest in what we have, taking care of what we have, but also working on a system that supports bulky waste, that supports hazardous waste, that confronts hard to recycle materials, and reuse and repair are part of that infrastructure. So I guess that's kind of where I see where we need to grow this system, and that tonnage, like roadway capacity, will always be there, but it is not what motivates us. It's a means to an end. So I am thinking more about the two models of new investment that were in the middle, and about the scale of them. I thought we would see more depots or hubs. Neither of those are real technical words. They can be anything or everything. But in terms of like getting down on smaller scale, which I think is the promise of the Recycling Modernization Act, I'm still not seeing it because everything still looks really big on the map. And I guess that's just my concern, is that we're still only looking at large scale, big investment.
Yeah, if I may, then I can, I think Councilor Huang also asked about RMA. And so one of the main issues that we have right now is that we don't know how much our producers going to be paying for in terms of infrastructure from the RMA. So we are in the dark on that. So we know that they will pay a fee for the materials that are managed at facilities. But when you take into account the tonnage that flows through a transfer station, that tonnage flow that is covered under the RMA is going to be very small. So can we expect the RMA to pay fully for the operation of a transfer station? Absolutely no. Can we expect the RMA to pay fully for the operation of a multi-material depot? No, only a part of it. So the RMA producers are responsible only for building depots for the material covered on the RMA. So you have a situation in which you have bottle drops for bottled bill material, paint facility, retail paint locations for paint, electronic facilities for electronics, and now RMA depots for RMA material only. So one of the goals of the distributed scenario is to, of all the depots that the PROs in the RMA, the RMA PROs, the producers under the RMA are required to build, is to have some of them led by Metro to provide the public with opportunities to bring multiple materials to the same location. So if you think about this, the three scenarios that have new facilities, we would be building some of the depots that would take RMA material, and then the producers under the RMA are going to have to build the rest, right? Or use existing infrastructure, private infrastructure. So that is how we have thought about the scenarios for the moment, but there is an implicit strategy in all of this, which is once we know how much are they going to cover, are they going to pay for building new facilities or only a portion of a facility? Because if that facility accepts more materials, they're not obligated to pay fully. So then the strategy would be to wait and see how much money can we expect from producers under the RMA and decide, is 4 reuse and recycling centers enough, or should Metro take a leading role and work with the PRO to build more of those multi-material depots. That could be an implicit strategy in the plan. But I go back to the problem that we have is that we have no information. So we cannot cost, like if you asked me to give you an estimate of how much will be covered by the RMA to build these facilities, I would rather not give you an estimate right now.
Yeah, I get that we can't cost it. I feel like I want to see a future vision of what it would look like for us to be able to go and say, you're putting your depot right here. Here is what we could bring to the table. We could bring a little bit more resource and we would collect X, Y, and Z extra material that you're not naturally going to collect yourself. Because otherwise, we're going to just be hands off of the ones that we don't have a direct role in.
And with the three not with the base, even with the baseline. So with all four scenarios, Metro has as an operator, Metro will have a role in the RMA, collecting material at Metro transfer stations. In the baseline, it's a small role because we have these areas where we collect recyclables that we can add some materials, but it will be difficult, right? In the full service, we have those four full service transfer stations that would accept RMA material, and we would get compensation, however that much is, from producers, and the distributed to. And then in the no-bill scenario, we could have grants to private, so apart from the two Metro transfer stations, we could have grants to private facilities, private and nonprofit facilities, whoever is willing to build those new recycling depots, where we would have where Metro could have a role in saying, this is the area where it's most needed, and there are opportunities to collect other materials at that location too.
Okay, thank you. I track what you're saying. I think for me at this point, I'm having trouble because we're operating on two axes at once. One is the future state per material and process, and then the other is a geographic investment question. And I want to solve for future state before I get to geographic. Because I need to understand where we're going before I say, let's do that 6 times or 8 times or however many times.
Well, I don't know if it helps for context, but the PROs in the Tri-County area, well, actually in the urban area of our region, the Metro boundary region is supposed to build 40 some, yeah. So it would seem rather a stretch for Metro to build all 40 of those. So then somewhere in between is the.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Councilor Gonzalez.
Thank you. Yeah, I put I didn't ask my question before because I wanted to, make sure I went through the meeting packet again just to make sure there wasn't any technical information I'm missing from this for this item. But I think one of the areas that I'm struggling with a little bit with the analysis is, and I appreciate Councilor Wong for asking the question about allocation and assumptions, is I see the stars, but without really understanding I thought the assumptions would all be constant basically throughout all 4 scenarios. And what I believe I heard was you mentioned that certain scenarios assume for different allocations to Metro, et cetera. And so we had a benchmark of average household cost, but obviously some of these things, all of these things will cost resources. And so what wasn't very clear to me was, well, how exactly how is that cost absorbed and who absorbs it? I think I would also like the opportunity to see. So that's kind of my first question and comment. I would welcome the opportunity to kind of learn a little bit more about, any other assumptions that were not held consistent throughout the analysis and assessment of the 4 scenarios.
I really appreciate this conversation, and I want to address Councilor Gonzalez's comment too, because I think what we're getting, the intention of these scenarios was to spark a conversation. It was really to show you the landscape of options of what Metro's role could be in the system. And out of that comes questions around what is the level of investment that we want to make? How do we balance affordability with waste reduction and access? Because there are trade-offs in those decision-making. And what I'm hearing now from council is the desire to step into that detail a little bit more. The assumptions around the allocations, Councilor Gonzalez, that you pointed out, we did not hold that constant around Metro continuing to allocate 40% of the wet waste to us. That was a lever that we wanted to show you the different options of what would happen if we didn't allocate that much wet waste to Metro and our services. It would impact affordability, but would provide investment in other private parts of the system. So part of the next steps that SD went through was the idea we're kind of here in the landscape, and the next step is to get into kind of a funnel, looking at more specific preferred scenario elements is what we're calling them, so we can kind of tease apart some of the components in this. But based on the conversation today and what I think I heard President Peterson say is the desire now to kind of make those statements around, does council have consensus and agreement around Metro continuing at least at 40% because of X, Y, and Z, reasons? Or is there still questions around that? Because that will directly inform what the trade-offs would be and what the options would be before us. So I don't know if that, so there is, I just wanted to make sure council knew we're still here in the landscape of possibility, and we have a ways to go, but this is doing what it was intended to do, to kind of tease out where there are questions, and for us to be able to kind of narrow those areas where you really want to discuss. But I do think it would be helpful if there are places. And I think the other, and I might have heard this wrong, was also around affordability. Like how do we define that? And that would help us better understand levels of investment. Because if we're only willing to increase the monthly garbage bill by $2 versus $10, that provides a framework for us to determine what's possible. And then we can show you the trade-offs relative to the other values that you've stated.
Thanks, Marta. Yeah, I mean, my request is, especially since I know we're really high level still, but we're establishing these, foundational agreements essentially on how we move forward and, potentially make seismic shifts to fees, to allocations, right? And so I think that's the nature of my question and the questions that I'm hearing. And, in general, when I see a rating system across different scenarios, I have the inherent assumption that there are constants throughout those scenarios. And I mean, I think it's important if and when the variables are changing, that there's a disclaimer. Because otherwise, I feel a little misled in terms of like understanding the baselines and how the ratings work. And I don't want to say it makes the outcomes feel a little cooked, but it's hard to, and I think this is what we're all saying, right? Like we want to be active decision makers and really help realize the work that we've done, the seeds that we've planted for the regional waste plan. But I think that's been an area that as soon as I saw the first stars, I rose my hand because I was like, I had a question, the question about that. But moreover, I mean, I think with the future around producer responsibility and the Modernization Act, I do think we're already in this period where there's a lot of fog moving forward around how the system is going to change. That being said, I mean, there is a significant geographic inequity, particularly with my district and the farther that you go west and southwest. So I think that I'm kind of in this place of, I feel this urgency and very clear direction from my constituents, while also really being aware of the regional implications and whatnot. And And also just another thing around meeting our system goals. I think we had the Reuse Collective testify this morning. We obviously have close relationships with private transfer stations and private haulers, and the work that they do to also live up to the goals that Metro has set in their own ways. And so I think it's just a matter of also having a way to recognize that there are those multiple ways to advance those goals, as well as there's a tension there. So anyway, just a lot of thoughts. I hope they're landing at MRC. I know I'm not in the room, so I can't read if it's hitting or not, but
I'm nodding my head.
Okay, great.
Yeah, no, I mean,
right,
I think you bring up so many important points, and definitely not our intention to not put those assumptions forward. Our intent was to show you the world of possibility and not make assumptions around Metro's role, not assume that we're just going to guarantee this, and trying to balance the values around affordability and waste reduction. And I think the West Side is a really great example, because there are choices to make there. We know it's a known gap. We've heard that from communities. We know that it's very expensive to do self-haul. We know those communities don't have the same access to household hazardous waste services. That's a great example. Those are not profitable services, which is why we step in and provide that gap. So I don't know if so the questions, if we just took that little small part, and I'll look at my team to correct me if I say this wrong, there are implications. If we were to build a new facility over there, what would be one option that we try and articulate? Could we keep the cost the same with maintaining the 40% allocation to Metro, or would we need more increased tonnage in order to sustain that operation at an affordable rate? The alternative to us, Metro, building a facility would be to set the rates at the transfer station that is over there and figure out how to provide household hazardous waste in a different way.
I think we're on the right track. So I want to get through all the questions because we're coming up on one.
Okay.
But I think there's an iterative process that we knew we were going to have, and what I'm hoping we heard today so far is that part of the information flow is just as important as the services provided, and trying to balance these two things out as we go along, and that what I really feel like we need to get out of this conversation, and I may do some thumbs up, thumbs down of which scenarios you're leaning towards, and why. And we may do a round robin of that quick at the end, but go ahead, Councilor Simpson.
Thank you, Council President. I'm not gonna hold y'all, because we don't have much time. I would say, is there a fifth scenario that is balanced? Because I would like for us to have our own Metro Paint facility, but I would also like to support a system that is already in place in our reuse system and help it bring it online with everything else, but also balance the needs of our current use. And I'll say this real quick. That slide with the stars, the first one that said like baseline, the average cost is like $40. I don't think that's true in some communities, because I got elderly neighbors and they like to, they're not trash wonks, but they're, bill hawks. And I think my neighbor last week showed me their waste management bill at $87 for the last 3 months. And so I don't think that $40 is.
I will note that most garbage bills are charged on a 2-month cycle, and so that's probably combined monthly. But not to say that there are differences in costs of bills.
They showed it to me. That was their monthly charge.
That's a lot.
Yeah, and they're elderly on a fixed income. So
Good to point out. Okay, Councilor Nolan.
Thanks, Madam President. We seem to love this topic, and there are lots of ways we try to pull it apart and understand it. So I had questions, but I'm gonna hold off on that. I wanna get to what you laid out about what are we trying to accomplish? I wanna reiterate, it's not news to anyone here, that a top priority for me is the reduction in wet waste, anything that goes to a landfill. And essentially, I think that puts you in a curious role, because I think of reduction in wet waste as staunching the growth, not per capita, but total, and then seeing it decline, which means it would really be asking you to work yourselves out of business, as well as our private partners. That if we're successful with that, and I think we have to be, we'll be reducing tonnage, and 40% of 60% is a lot less than 40% of what there is today. So I want us to pivot and start thinking in that kind of framework. The second value or objective I'd have relates a little bit, maybe, Esty, to what you called off. And it answers your question, Marisa. I think we want to encourage innovation by optimizing the utilization of existing fixed assets, whether they are publicly owned or privately owned. I think that your question was, do we consciously want to not destabilize the current investment? And I would say yes, but put it in a frame of, we want to encourage innovation wherever it springs from. And sometimes private industry or nonprofits can be more nimble than we can be. And so I want to make sure that possibility exists. And the other value I have is affordability, and I think rate structures that cities adopt based on how many cans or how big the can of wet waste you put out helps a little bit in that way. And other things we can do to facilitate tactics like that, so that someone who's low income can be smart about separating the things that can be taken to a reuse center and separating the things that can be recycled, so that what they put in their wet waste can fit into a smaller and smaller and smaller can. It's a fascinating topic. I'm sure you all know that. And I have lots more questions, but I won't raise them today.
Oh, okay. Thank you. There's a lot here. So can we do a quick, can we go back to the 4 scenarios on the screen? That would help me.
We are bringing that up now.
Thank you. So while it's coming up, I think from past discussions, and the reason we're even doing these scenarios, just to remind ourselves, is that the full capital plan that was put out, and I think 3 of us up here adopted it like the first week we were here, so we weren't part of it, but Councilor Gonzalez was laying out quite a vision in a build scenario that had us doing everything that we had been asked to do, and everything, solving everything and in a grand scale. And I think we wanted to pull back from the grand scale and figure out what could we afford and still close some of the gaps that we all have acknowledged that we have. Can we go to all, I would like to go to the slide with all of them on.
Which
all-
slide was that?
It's like slide 5 or so.
Thanks. So we've already pulled, I think we've already pulled back from the full scale of the entire 2030 waste plan. Am I getting nods on that? There's no scenario here that says we're doing everything that was in the 2030 waste plan at the scale that we had called for. that's off the table already.
The guidance in the regional waste plan doesn't get specific to a scenario. It says a mix of, and so this is operationalizing that guidance to what it might look like.
But the reason we went into this is because we had the opportunity to go forward and purchase a piece of land and then build out what we thought we wanted to build out, but then realized how much that was gonna cost, how much that meant the rates would go up, what tonnage allocation we would need to start moving around in order to afford just that one facility.
Yeah, the regional waste plan provides the guidance for the region. What it's missing is an infrastructure, a long-term capital improvement plan. That's something that we haven't had as a department and what this plan sets out to do.
So that, I mean, I'm just reminding us of, this is what initiated this conversation, is that that was a lot of money for one thing that we just wanted to accomplish. And there were good goals in there of, making sure we had better safety and that there was better access and there were a lot of good things in it, but it was expensive. So now we've got these scenarios, and I think it would be helpful to know if we could just quickly go down the line, what you're leaning towards, and just one sentence of why. So let's just start. Councilor Huang, could we just go down what are you leaning towards in this, and why?
That's a tough one. I think I would, at this point, like to explore the distributed model more. I think that actually provides the most coverage and potential collaborations with reuse partners. And I'd be also curious about how they would be run, whether they would be kind of Metro staff or if we would subcontract that out. So a lot of questions, but I think that's the one I'd like to explore
So
more.
somewhere around there, yeah. This isn't like you're held to it for all time, it's just, it's just a reaction.
Yeah, my decision's made.
Yeah,
I think I
no,
made it
done,
last
we're
year.
done, we're moving on, yeah, go ahead.
This is,
You want me to come back?
no,
Okay.
I don't like any of them. Because they're not framed around a reduction in wet waste. If I recall from previous discussions, they kind of assume the same, some growth in waste produced and disposed of at curbside, consistent across the scenarios. So I want a scenario that doesn't just get to 1.2 million tons diverted, but to 2 million. The differences in the scenarios are like 10%, which seems to me rounding error when we're projecting out as far as you are. But I understand, Madam President, that sometimes you just have to vote among the choices on the ballot. And I would say no build.
Okay. Counselor.
Sure. So I guess I'm gonna Frankenstein my answer here. That at its core, it's probably like the distributed, but I'm more interested in small-sized and not mid-sized. And I want to reach over to full service, and I do recognize that reuse facilities need a giant warehouse and not a small warehouse. And that I'm intrigued by the idea of, say, an old big box store as a reuse mall, but if we can't do that, I'm fine with boutique and small. And then I do think that in terms of the no build, I like that Metro has explored investing in private facilities, because I think that with the recycling modernization investments that are coming online, we need to be opportunistic about hopping on for private investments that are made there.
Cool. Thank you. Counselor Simpson.
I'm gonna blend mine.
for it.
I'm in between distributed and no build, and really on the no build side because, we had testimony this morning, folks in the community doing it, but to Councilor Lewis's point, finding those small to mid-size spaces for them to operate, I think that's gonna be the challenge. But when I look at the landscape right now, and I have to prop it up, Orlando over at City of Roses brought in the first electric trash truck in the state, period, full stop. And they're investing in themselves. So I would say, you know, as government partners and agencies, we should also help those smaller haulers get ahead of the curve because we know what's coming in terms of electrification and modernizing our transfer station. So I'm in between distributed and no build. So that would be my fifth one, balanced. Balanced.
Counselor Gonzalez.
Yeah, thank you. You know, for me, I am leaning towards distributed, while also really liking some of the aspects of the no build, particularly the emphasis on grants and supporting both private and reuse. The reason that I'm leaning more towards distributed is because, you know, and I need to again call out the lack of equity in the geography, essentially. You know, Multnomah County and Clackamas County have a public station, public facility, and you know the West Side doesn't, and it's a huge issue. And I just again want to continue bringing that up. And so I would hope that our answer is somewhere between the two, so we're able to provide a good blend and mix of services. Thanks.
Great, thank you. I also, my initial was somewhere between distributed and no build. And I think for all the reasons that everybody has already articulated. So I think there's definitely a trend line there. I think there's some umbrella additional conversations about how to do that. But I also think that the continual sticking to our mission of how do we actually reduce the amount of waste going to the landfill. And I think it's not about the private sector going out of business, about changing the model of their business over time.
Yes.
Right?
And us as well.
Yeah, and us as well. And I think that's what we're struggling with up here is that there, again, when you look at major things, I just listened to the podcast Timber Wars. There was immediate in 1987, 88, immediate stop in all timber sales and no plan, right? Trying to transition out of energy to clean energy, there needs to be a plan because there's a lot of people whose jobs are dependent on an old way of doing work, right? And that's what scares people. And I think that's the tension is how do we move ourselves? We can't do it on behalf of the private, but we can have a longer conversation so that they see themselves in this transition and we are there as a partner. And I think that's the tension that we're feeling. So how do we fill in the gaps where it's right for Metro to fill in the gaps, but not grow ourselves into, you know, what we think is the best way to do business, but still allow for all the innovation in the private and the CBO world to happen. I think this conversation has helped kind of congeal that kind of framework for moving forward. So I appreciate it. It's a lot of work. There's a lot of work to get here, but it's a very complex system. And kudos to you guys for being able to hold all of these threads in your head as we move through the conversation, because it is not an easy system to grab hold of any part of it. It just wants to move away from you as soon as you think you've got it. So, Marisa, did you want to kind of summarize where we want to go next?
Yeah, thank you so much, President Peterson. I think this has been a really fruitful conversation, and I think it's illuminated some of the trade-offs and the competing parts of this system. And I'm wondering if we're sort of narrowing in on that distributed versus no build end of the spectrum, if we should come back to you with some variables that we then work through those scenarios as Councilor Gonzalez was talking about. So one variable that I heard come through loud and clear is tonnage. And so we'll talk to the team and see if maybe that's an angle that we explore with those scenarios. The other one that I heard come through really strongly again is waste reduction, affordability.
So we can play around with that a little bit. And then the last thing that I wanted to just call back into our attention, because I think a lot of times tonnage and the transfer station fees take up a lot of space, but we have a completely different lever in the regional system fee that is not reliant on that 40%. The 40% only matters so much in that we charge our fee on that. So we can also look at that too. I think that's another variable to be explored, like we've talked before, the balance between the transfer station fees and the regional system.
Thank you. I appreciate you reminding us because that is another inherent tension. Yeah, I think that's a good summary. I think because it's that lower end of the spectrum in terms of investment, prioritizing some of these things where there are gaps and where there are safety needs on our own facilities. I think those are the two things I heard the most is let's fill in some of those gaps, but at a practical size, mid-size, small size, wherever it's right, but what does that take geographically, but also accessibility, the things that are not, the market is not taking care of. But I don't think anybody should walk out of here thinking that this council is not ready to invest in making our own facilities more safe.
Thank you.
For the public and our employees.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Let's just make sure that's,
Agreed.
that's on the record.
Yeah.
So with that, I think we'll close out this conversation. Seeing no other hands raised online or in person. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the
Appreciate all of
conversation
the
today.
hard work and looking forward to kind of starting to narrow this down. So thanks. All right, no COO communications today, so thank you, Marisa, for giving us that time back. Counselors, to Counselor Lewis's point, sorry, this is always at the end, but we'll go down the line. Counselor Simpson.
Real quick, last night we had the Rise Up Community Enhancement Grant. We started that process with the Troutdale, Fairview, and with Village Communities. It was a good table brought together by East County Rising Community Projects, some real, I guess, talented folks in the community that are already doing work. And I will say this and wrap up, happy Veterans Day to all the veterans out there. Please show your admiration and love to everybody who served. If you're mourning, mourn them, celebrate them. If you love them, love on them. If you don't have a relationship with them, call out, reach out to them because they did put their life on the line. For us to enjoy these freedoms that we have and this democracy that we do enjoy. So happy Veterans Day to everybody.
To the veterans on the council and to the veterans at Metro, same message, yes. You are a much valued asset and we thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Just real quick, Tri-County Planning Body met last night, and the first item that we will be using the RAFT, which is the regional fee, the regional investment, not fee, it's an investment, will be for landlord retention program. And there's some tension between where on the continuum we fall between coordination and consolidation. But really real talk for the first time, and we'll have recommendations next month on how to spend money regionally on landlord attainment.
Great, thank you. Anybody down here? Counselor Gonzalez, anything? All right.
No, nothing to report.
Thank you. All right, with that, we are adjourned and our next meeting is November 14th at 10:30 a.m. Thank you.